Welcome to the chair. I'm your host, Dr. Digby James Wren, and today we're having a quick look at the Australian election. And now Labor's leading in the polls by about 10 points. But what that really means is if they lose 5, it's going to be 50-50. So 45 to 55 for Labor. Australia is in trouble. The economy is going to have, and look, the IMF said this quite a few years ago, 10 years of declining living standards. So now Labor has gone from a couple of surpluses for the last few years. Now it's going to go straight back into deficits. And that money is going to be going into healthcare, renewables, education, and the biggest one, of course, defense. Why, of course, I'm not really sure why, of course, but housing is also big. Medicare, so giving better medications and so forth. Although that's going to come under conflict with the Trump administration's policies towards Australia. And as I said, with aluminum, or aluminium as the Australians say, that's going to be problematic as well. Look, it's a very small percentage of GDP, but it's the compound effect of all of the tariffs and the effect of the tariffs on other countries which trade with Australia, and that's primarily China, of course. And so the boom, the mini boom, let's say, that's been going on with minerals, there was a really big boom back in the 90s and 2000s, but that's over. But in the last few years, there's been another boom as China's economy has switched into the new productive forces, EVs, of course, and solar panels and so forth. And now Australia is also transitioning, and they rely on China for that. There's nowhere else they're going to be able to get this at, affordably, so good, fast, and cheap, right? So that is the permanent dilemma the Australian government is in, balancing their security arrangements with the Americans with their trade relationship with China. Now, China is far and away the biggest trade partner of Australia, and the budget doesn't really mention that, according to all of the information that I've been able to access. And you can read this in the ASEAN chair that is released once a week. There's updates on that. There are other updates daily. You can check daily, but what we're looking at here is a very difficult election. Look, I think Labor's probably going to win it. I'll call it and say they're going to win. But it could be a very, very narrow win, and it's possible that the Greens may hold the balance of power, or the Teals as well, which is young, educated, urban elites, may hold the balance of power in the Senate. And an unlikely outcome, but possible outcome, is that they may hold the balance of power in the House as well. That is not good because, as we can see, it's happened in Europe with all of the political turmoil in Europe. Weak coalitions just cannot hold against the tariff and Trump effect. And so I think that's also true here in Australia. So one has to look very, very carefully at that. So if you're voting, just keep that in mind. Look, Donald Trump really was asked the other day about AUKUS, and he had to ask the journalist, what does that mean? He didn't really know. Now, it doesn't mean he doesn't know about submarines, and he doesn't know about Australia's importance to the American security framework, forward posture into Asia, and that's what it is, forward posture. I'd be very, very worried about listening to John Anderson's podcasts and YouTube channel where he interviewed the former Home Affairs Minister of Australia, and they were talking about a tyrannical China, and Australia can't live with a China like that, and so forth and so on. But this is absolutely not true. Look, China is not in any way interested in invading Australia or taking over Australia or anything else. What China is interested in is stability. And Australia needs to be in stability as well. And the greatest source of instability in the world today is the United States. So this security arrangement and the exorbitant, and I mean ultra exorbitant cost of these submarines, which is basically just 3 really old Virginia-class American submarines based out of Western Australia, and possibly some others based out of Wollongong or south of Sydney on the east coast. They're just American submarines being based out of Australia. There's technical upgrading and all that sort of thing for the Australians, so nuclear energy and things like that. And the Liberals, the opposition, they're promoting nuclear energy, which is really not going to work very well. But there is concerns, of course, about the grid and being able to give stable enough energy and low costs for consumers, but stable enough energy for the AI wave that's happening right now. Huge data centers need really reliable power, and they quite often need enormous water resources for cooling, and that means being able to build desalination plants in Australia's case, because water is something that Australia does not have a lot of. Now, let's think about China and its Australian exports. Australia is going to maintain and to get growth, because it's anemic at the moment. To get growth, Australia is going to have a better relationship with China. And so the Trump tariff effect and the new cabinet that he has, and Hegseth as a military defense secretary, Marco Rubio, who's basically a neocon, totally anti-China. He's going to try and play Philippines. He's going to try and play Taiwan. But Australia cannot be falling into that. Now, Albanese and his government has navigated a careful path along that line, but how much further they can go is going to be difficult. But look, I can see right now that although public opinion is not really changing definitively toward China, mainly because of the Rupert Murdoch News Corporation effect, which dominates Australian media to an extraordinary amount, and the idea that the ABC, that's the national broadcaster, needs to keep a measure of balance, but it's not really watched by most Australians. So the mediascape is still anti-China, and I think that's the next step. That has to change. But Twiggy Forrest, one of the richest men in Australia, who owns enormous iron ore mines in Western Australia and made his fortune in the iron ore to China trade and is still doing very well with that, has just succeeded in suing Meta or Facebook for things related to using his image for scams. So online scamming being run by Facebook, and not just in Australia, but globally. And that puts a very bad light on the scams that have been reported all the time in Cambodia and Thailand and other places, and so many Indians, but most recently been caught up in that. Not so many Chinese. But Twiggy Forrest's action in America and against Meta, where he's won. I don't know what the final ruling will be, but this tells us that the media interference in Australia is to a really abnormal level, and basically is always or has always been anti-China. And that once that chain is broken, once Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation is not able to operate, and that Meta is finally sort of pushed into a free speech and no scamming, well then possibly we might find that the Australian electorate might start to believe that being friendly with China is in their best interest, and they used to think that prior to 2015, but it's the Morrison government, the Liberals and Morrison changed that, and so let's get back to the election. Despite the media, let's say, imbalance in Australia, Labor has been careful to navigate, and that's historically been their case. Is they've always been pro-Asia, not just pro-China. You remember that Japan and South Korea are also very big markets for Australian exports. ASEAN is growing. There's a huge contingent of Australians in Vietnam and Cambodia and Thailand trying very hard to build Australian businesses in education and health and services and so forth. And that's probably a good thing, generally speaking. So if the Labor can get back in, and I think they will, as I said before, there's a very good chance that those may strengthen, and that's going to be very good for China. And then one just needs to cast a quick eye, and we're still referring to the Australian election here. We just put a quick eye onto what's happening in China, and clearly they've just hosted a 60, I think it was 60 American business leaders, and where Xi Jinping or Li Qiang has said that China is opening up more, and there's going to be more 100% owned foreign businesses. Now, this is an attempt to attract Japanese, South Korean, Australian, RCEP investors and European investors and American investors to the Chinese market, where there's real growth. Because remember, the Atlanta Fed just said 2 days ago that the US was definitely going to have a contraction of over 2% in the second quarter. And all these tariff policies that Trump's put in has affected the dollar badly, it's affected the markets badly, it's affected the gold price. And so I think we're going to see that there's going to be more capital outflows out of the US. Now, it's still an enormous capital market, much, much larger than Europe, which is number 2, and China, which is a very small number 3 in that. But that was the case with cars before. That was the case with computers before, with chips, with phones, and with many other areas of what the manufacturing and the goods and services that we buy still emanating from China. And as China moves up that value chain, I think that's very attractive for foreign investors, and that means Australia too. Now, Australia has got a chance here to really extend its lead in exports into China. Remember, Australia is a major competitor with the US for many exports. So, you know, the Americans don't like to see the Australians selling on their agriculture or their minerals into China. And they're going to do whatever they can to stop that. You know, there's no good on you, mate. Let's all be fair and be friends and have a beer at the pub. It's not like that. And just talking about beer, part of the mini budget that's been released is to support, to take away excise or taxes on beer and wines and things like that. And that's probably very good. And what Australia needs to be doing, and I think what Albanese is trying to achieve in the budget tonight, is to get Australian companies to be more innovative, niche markets, and sell into China and Asia much more. The US market, I think, is not going to be the target for them. It's going to cost them enormous amounts of money and investment to get into the US market. It's not worth it. Go to China, go to ASEAN, invest your money in there, and I think, you know, as I said, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, that's the way to go. And I'd like to see, and of course, number one is China, and then Japan, South Korea. I'd like to see Australian companies doing that.